At 90 years old, Don Shula sat with a Florida sunrise at his shoulder, a coach who had outlasted eras, egos, and every excuse the sport could offer. Perfection changes a man. It blesses him. It haunts him. Shula had touched it once, not in theory but on grass, when 17 games ended without a misstep. For the rest of his life, that unblemished season became a compass he refused to drop. Even as the league chased speed, slogans, and spectacle, people remember the trophies. They whisper about the losses that still ache in old locker rooms. Shula remembered faces, rivals who made him steel his jaw, owners who tested his code, quarterbacks who needed to be broken down before they could be built. In the quiet, he could name them. He could admit the truths he buried under preparation and Sunday grit. The perfect record did not make him gentle. It made him exact. It made him unafraid to be hated. This film is not a parade of banners. It is the ledger he kept behind the play sheet. 5 hidden truths that shaped a career from Cleveland Winters to Miami Heat. Truths born from shock, betrayal, and the stubborn dignity of a man who believed the game should be played only one way. Why did he never bend, even when bending might have saved him pain? Why did certain names still tighten his voice? Tonight, Don Shula tells you the coldest truths, the ones he never forgave completely. Before the legend, before the champagne baths and the parades down Biscayne Boulevard, Don Shula was a kid from a working-class family in Grand River, Ohio. His father was a meat cutter, a man of few words and long days. Discipline was not something taught, it was absorbed. Shula carried that silence into every locker room he ever entered. He was not the biggest or the fastest, but his mind worked in patterns. While others ran, he calculated. While others celebrated, he studied. After graduating from John Carroll University, he caught the eye of Paul Brown, who saw in him a rare kind of student, someone obsessed with understanding the game more than playing it. Shula's years as a defensive back for Cleveland, Baltimore, and Washington were modest, but they planted something fierce inside him. He learned the game's cruelty. He saw how careers ended in a single mistimed tackle. He watched coaches make decisions that ruined men's futures. It made him vow that if he ever led a team, he would demand everything but never lie to his players. By the early 1960s, that vow found its stage. At 33, he became the youngest head coach in the NFL, taking charge of the Baltimore Colts. He had eyes that cut through noise. Players said you could feel his presence before he spoke. His practices were brutal, his expectations worse. But the Colts responded. They became a machine built on accountability. And yet, perfection teased him. When the Colts entered Super Bowl III as heavy favorites, Shula believed destiny had arrived early. Then Joe Namath guaranteed a Jets victory, and the unthinkable happened. Baltimore lost. The humiliation carved something into Shula that never healed. To him, failure was not an event. It was a virus to be exterminated. He left Baltimore with that scar and found redemption waiting in Miami. The Miami Dolphins were young, unpolished, and directionless when Shula arrived in 1970. Within 2 years, he turned them into an army of order. He taught them that victory began on Tuesday, in the film room, not on Sunday under lights. He was the kind of man who remembered every missed assignment, every lazy stride. Some called it obsession, Shula called it responsibility. In the humid nights of South Florida, his players sweated through practices so intense that several nearly walked away. But the few who stayed found history. In 1972, Miami did not just win, they did not lose. 17 times, they walked onto the field and left with nothing broken. No coach has ever repeated it, and Shula knew none ever would. Yet perfection carried a price. Behind that immaculate record were broken friendships, quiet regrets, and the ghosts of choices he could never take back. Those are the truths he carried into old age, the stories that reveal the man behind the headset, the perfectionist who could not rest, even when history bowed. Every empire begins with a wound, and for Don Shula, that wound was Super Bowl III. It was the day perfection mocked him. The Baltimore Colts were supposed to crush the upstart New York Jets, a team from the inferior AFL, led by a brash quarterback named Joe Namath. Shula's Colts had gone 13-1. They were disciplined, cold, efficient. Vegas called it a mismatch. America called it a coronation. Inside the locker room, Shula's players wore confidence like armor. They trusted the system, the order, the machine their coach had built. But Shula had a feeling, a flicker of unease he could not silence. The Jets were loud, But behind the swagger was something he recognized: belief. Shula had always said that preparation wins games. That day, preparation betrayed him. The Jets confused his defense, struck early, and never lost control. When the final whistle blew, the Colts were humiliated, 12-point favorites beaten by an underdog that refused to listen to logic. The press crushed him. Fans turned on him. Even some of his players questioned his decisions. He was only 39, yet the whispers began. Maybe he could not win the big one. For Shula, that loss was not just professional. It was personal. He felt the shame of an entire league, the embarrassment of letting arrogance dictate his plan. He never forgot the sight of Namath jogging off the field, finger raised in triumph, while his own players stared blankly into the Miami night. That image burned into him like a permanent scar. When he finally left Baltimore, he carried more than a record. He carried a vow. Never again would a team of his underestimate anyone. Never again would emotion or expectation cloud the discipline of preparation. He would turn that pain into an armor so tight that no opponent could pierce it. In Miami, that vow became religion. Players said that when Shula spoke about that game, his eyes hardened. It was as if he could still hear the crowd cheering for the Jets. He used that memory like a weapon. Every mistake in practice, every lazy step, every smirk from a rookie who thought talent was enough. Shula saw Namath's grin in it. That single defeat reshaped the man. It gave birth to the coach who demanded flawlessness, who dissected every play until it bled truth. To outsiders, he seemed obsessed. To those inside, it felt like destiny. They watched a man rebuild himself brick by brick, using humiliation as his mortar. Years later, when Miami finished their perfect season in 1972, reporters asked if it erased the pain of Super Bowl III. Shula paused. He smiled, but his answer was soft, almost reluctant. "Nothing erases a loss like that," he said. "You just learn how to live with it." Behind the trophies and the records, that was the hidden truth. The legend of Don Shula was not built on victory, it was forged in defeat. Super Bowl III did not destroy him. It purified him. It stripped away comfort, ego, and excuse, leaving only will. The will to never feel small again. Every dynasty needs a scar to remember where it began. For Don Shula, that scar never faded. It simply became the fuel that lit the perfect season. Don Shula never yelled for the sake of noise. When he raised his voice, it was like thunder rolling across the field, calculated, deliberate, meant to shake the air and the soul. For Shula, control was not just a coaching philosophy, it was survival. Every inch of his success, every win, every ounce of respect, came from a belief that discipline was the only shield against chaos. His players feared him. They respected him too, but fear came first. To Shula, that was necessary. He wanted men who operated with precision, who could line up in blistering Miami heat and run the same play 100 times until it became muscle memory. He believed football mirrored life. If you lost control, even for one heartbeat, it all collapsed. Some players called him the general, others, the machine. But those who truly understood him knew his need for control came from a place of fragility. He had seen what happened when emotions ruled the sideline. He had seen coaches crumble, teams turn on each other, talent wasted because no one demanded excellence. So he became the man who did. During practice, he patrolled every yard with a stopwatch and a stare. He fined players for being late, for wearing the wrong socks, for jokes during meetings. He banned beards. He monitored curfews. He once told a player who laughed during a drill, "If you can laugh, you can run." And he made him run. It wasn't cruelty, it was conviction. His Dolphins were not the most talented team in the league, but they were the most prepared. He conditioned them until their bodies stopped arguing with pain. His methods broke some, sharpened others, and bonded all. When the 1972 season arrived, they ran through it like clockwork. No mistakes, no shortcuts, no surrender. But that control came with a cost. Some players said they could never truly relax around him. Quarterbacks like Bob Grease later admitted that playing for Shula meant learning to suppress your own instincts. You executed his plan or you sat. Even Dan Marino, years later, joked that he had to earn the right to breathe differently. Behind closed doors, Shula wrestled with that truth. He knew he had built men who followed orders, but he sometimes wondered if he had also built soldiers who feared freedom. His wife once said that even at home, he needed a schedule. Dinner at 6, lights out by 10, Perfection, after all, didn't end with football. Yet it was that very rigidity that made him immortal. Shula's teams rarely beat themselves. They were the embodiment of structure in a league obsessed with chaos. His control created greatness, even if it cost him warmth. Years later, when asked if he ever regretted being so demanding, Shula looked at the reporter and said quietly, "If I gave them comfort, they wouldn't have given me history." That was the second hidden truth. Don Shula's control wasn't about power. It was about fear, the fear of ever losing it again. If there was one position that defined Don Shula's legacy, it was quarterback. He never saw them as stars. He saw them as extensions of himself, chess pieces that could either obey the plan or destroy it. Under his watch, two of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, Bob Griese and Dan Marino, learned what it meant to live under the weight of his perfection. But their relationships with Shula revealed more than football. They exposed the man behind the whistle, the teacher who demanded greatness but struggled to share trust. Bob Griese was quiet, humble, and methodical. He fit Shula's world perfectly. When Shula arrived in Miami in 1970, he molded Griese into a quarterback who rarely made mistakes. Griese didn't throw 50-yard bombs. He didn't need to. Shula's system was about efficiency, control, and execution. Together, they built a machine that ran on precision. During the perfect 1972 season, Griese threw only 8 passes in the Super Bowl, and Shula loved it. To him, that was proof that discipline could win championships. But Griese was a reflection of an era fading fast. By the 1,980 seconds, the game was changing. The air attack was becoming the spectacle. And when Dan Marino arrived in 1983, Shula faced something he hadn't in years: a prodigy who refused to be tamed. Marino was everything Shula wasn't: reckless, emotional, electric. His arm could erase any deficit. His confidence bordered on arrogance. Shula admired him, but also feared what he represented: a loss of control. Their relationship became a chess match. Shula tried to shape Marino's wild energy into order. Marino tried to remind Shula that instinct could win games too. There were shouting matches, long silences, moments when each thought the other would never bend. Yet, beneath the tension was respect. Shula knew Marino's talent was rare. Marino knew Shula's discipline was what kept chaos at bay. Together, they built one of the most dangerous offenses the league had ever seen. But there was a hidden sadness behind the brilliance. Despite all their success, Marino never won a Super Bowl. It haunted both men. For Shula, it was a crack in the armor, a reminder that even perfection and preparation could not guarantee victory. For Marino, it was a shadow he carried long after Shula retired. Fans called them the best duo never to win it all. But those who knew them saw something deeper. They were two men chasing the same ghost validation in a game that never truly forgave. In his later years, Shula admitted that he had learned as much from Marino as Marino had from him. "He taught me to let go," Shula once said. "I didn't always listen, but I heard him." That was rare honesty from a man built on order. The truth about Don Shula's quarterbacks was this: he didn't just coach them, he wrestled with them. They were his mirror, reflecting the part of him that wanted to control everything and the part that longed to believe in freedom. Griese gave him perfection. Marino gave him humanity. Together, they told the story of a man learning that greatness isn't always obedient, it's often defiant. That was the third hidden truth. Don Shula built legends, but they also built him. Every great coach carries a graveyard of names, men who could not meet the standard, men who left the field with something missing that no victory could replace. Don Shula's greatness was measured not only by those who thrived under him, but by those who didn't. Behind every championship banner was a list of players who walked away bruised, bitter, or quietly broken. Shula demanded loyalty, but loyalty under him came with a price. He wanted men who bled for the system, who accepted correction as a form of love. Some did. Others never recovered. There were veterans who arrived in Miami full of promise and left questioning their worth. Shula did not tolerate weakness. If you were injured, he expected you to play through it. If you were tired, he expected you to hide it. To him, the game owed no mercy, and neither did he. Players like Mercury Morris, Jake Scott, and others who helped him win titles later spoke with mixed feelings. They loved what they achieved, but not always how they achieved it. They said that under Shula, you didn't play for joy, you played for approval, and approval was rare. One misstep could erase a month of good work. Even his assistant coaches felt the weight. Some said working for Shula was like living under a microscope. Every detail mattered, every mistake echoed. He rarely praised, because he feared praise would breed comfort. Comfort, he once said, is where failure hides. That philosophy produced results but left scars. There was a story told quietly among his players about a young receiver who dropped a crucial pass in practice. Shula stopped the drill, walked across the field, and stared at him until the entire team fell silent. He didn't yell, he just said, "That's how losing starts." The next week the receiver was cut. It was business to Shula. It was personal to everyone else. But there was another side to that coldness, one almost no one saw. Years later, when that same player passed away, Shula sent flowers to the funeral with a note that simply read, "You were part of it." He never talked about it publicly. It wasn't guilt. It was his way of acknowledging that even the men he broke helped build his empire. He carried those ghosts into old age. When asked in an interview what haunted him most, he didn't mention losses or missed plays. He said, "The ones who never understood why I was hard on them." That was the truth he never said aloud in his prime. He pushed people to their edge because he believed that's where greatness began. But in pushing, he sometimes broke them beyond repair. The men who lasted under Shula became legends. The ones who didn't became lessons. He loved them all in his own way, even if the only way he knew to show love was through pressure. That was the fourth hidden truth. Don Shula's legacy was built on men who adored him, men who feared him, and men who could never forgive him. And somewhere deep down he forgave none of it either. In the twilight of his life, Don Shula often sat alone in his Miami home, surrounded by memories, helmets, playbooks, photographs, frozen in celebration. The world saw glory. What he saw were the sacrifices buried beneath it. For every trophy he lifted, something had been left behind. Greatness, he learned, never comes free. It collects its debts slowly, quietly, and always in full. Football had consumed everything. His family felt it first. His first wife, Dorothy, once said that being married to Don was like being married to the game itself. He missed birthdays, holidays, even his own children's milestones. When he was home, he wasn't truly there. His mind was replaying film, rewriting plays, analyzing opponents. His sons grew up idolizing him but fearing his silence. It wasn't anger, it was absence. His second wife, Mary Ann, met him after he had stepped away from the sidelines. She said that retirement didn't soften him, it just gave him space to think about what he had lost. He would sometimes sit in the living room with a notebook, writing names, dates, moments he wished he had handled differently. "You can't win forever," he once told her, "but you can lose the things that matter while trying." Shula's body carried the weight too. Decades of tension left him with heart issues, sleepless nights, and the slow erosion of health that comes from a life lived in relentless pursuit. Yet he never complained. He believed pain was the receipt for purpose. Even in retirement, he couldn't escape the game. Every Sunday, he watched from his chair as new generations of coaches rose and fell. They used tablets and analytics, tools that would have fascinated him. But what struck him most wasn't the technology, it was the emotion. The sideline celebrations, the dances, the cameras and faces. Football had changed. It had become entertainment as much as war. "They sell joy now," he once muttered. "We used to sell respect. Is not as good dozen to the fling. Is not as another doggo. Is not as another dozen." When former players visited, they often expected nostalgia. Instead, they found reflection. Shula would ask about their families, their children, their happiness. It was as if he was taking attendance for all the things he had once neglected. Some would thank him, others would forgive him. And in those moments, he would finally smile, not the sharp grin of victory, but the soft one of peace. Before he passed in 2020, Shula wrote a note that his sons later found folded in a playbook. It said, "The scoreboard isn't the truth is who you become after the clock runs out." It was simple, stripped of ego, written by a man who had chased perfection and found humanity instead. That was the final hidden truth. Greatness demands everything. It does not ask. It takes. It leaves you standing alone with your reflection, surrounded by applause that fades too fast. Don Shula reached the summit of his sport, but in doing so, he learned that the climb is lonelier than the view. He gave the game everything, and the game gave him immortality but not forgiveness. When the lights dimmed and the roar of the stadium faded into memory, Don Shula found himself confronting something few champions ever do: quiet. For most of his life, noise was his rhythm. Whistles, footsteps, helmets colliding. When it stopped, silence felt like a punishment. Yet, in that stillness, he began to understand his place in the story of the game he had shaped. He was more than a coach. He was a mirror of an era that valued order over glamour, substance over flash. The modern NFL had moved on, chasing spectacle and headlines, but the roots of its professionalism still bore his fingerprints. Every player who arrived on time, every team that demanded accountability, every coach who believed discipline wins more than luck, all of them, knowingly or not, carried a piece of Shula's philosophy. The city of Miami still whispered his name with reverence. Fans remembered not just the wins, but the feeling of stability he gave them. He made their Sundays sacred. For decades, the Dolphins were not just a team, they were a standard. Even as his health faded, Shula continued to mentor quietly, guiding younger coaches who sought his counsel. He told them not to chase records but to build character. The game ends, he'd say, but integrity doesn't. That was Don Shula's final victory. Beyond the trophies and the banners, beyond the statistics etched in history, he left behind a legacy of principle. He taught that perfection is temporary, but purpose is forever. In the end, the man who once demanded control found peace in letting go. Every sport has its prophets. Men who don't just win, but redefine what winning means. Don Shula was one of them. His name became shorthand for excellence, for discipline, for that old-school belief that greatness has to be earned inch by inch, play by play. When people speak of the NFL's golden age, his shadow stretches across every frame. He connected generations not through speeches or slogans, but through results that refuse to fade. Shula coached in a time before instant replays and billion-dollar contracts. Players earned modest salaries, played hurt, and often held second jobs in the off-season. Yet, even then, he demanded the professionalism of a corporate CEO. He showed the world that football could be more than a game. It could be a system, a moral code. When he took the field, his players stood straighter. When he spoke, even the crowd seemed to listen. But Shula's connection to America went deeper than the sport. During the turbulent 70s, when the country battled political mistrust and cultural division, the Miami Dolphins under his leadership offered something rare: certainty. They played clean, they played hard, and they played to win. That perfect 1,972 season became a symbol of what America longed to believe about itself, that perfection was still possible. Even decades later, each year when the last undefeated team loses, surviving members of that squad toast quietly, honoring both history and the man who made it. His influence didn't end on the sideline. Coaches who once stood beneath his glare carried his philosophy into the next century. Bill Belichick studied his methods. Tony Dungy cited him as a blueprint for leadership built on accountability. Even Nick Saban, who coached in Miami briefly, acknowledged that the foundation of his college dynasty echoed Shula's meticulous discipline. Every modern coach who preaches structure and preparation is, in some way, speaking his language. Yet the most powerful legacy of Don Shula may not lie in schemes or trophies, but in transformation. For all his rigidity, he evolved. He started as the stern taskmaster of the 60s and 70s, the man who demanded silence and obedience. By the time Dan Marino arrived, Shula had learned that control could coexist with creativity. He loosened his grip, not because he wanted to, but because the game forced him to grow. That evolution mirrored football itself, shifting from ground-and-pound tradition to aerial artistry. Through Shula, the old and the new learned to coexist. His players carried those lessons beyond the field. Many became coaches, businessmen, fathers who passed down his values of preparation, punctuality, and integrity. They often said that playing for Shula was like serving in the military. You didn't enjoy it until it was over. Then, years later, you realized it had shaped you. That was his true magic, molding men long after the final whistle. When he passed away in 2020, tributes poured in from every corner of the sport. Some spoke of his records, others of his humanity. Fans gathered outside Hard Rock Stadium, lighting candles beneath murals of his face. The Dolphins wore his initials on their helmets, and even rival teams bowed their heads in respect. The league had lost not just a coach, but a compass. To the end, Shula remained a study in contrasts. Hard yet humble, driven yet devout, proud yet reflective. He was a perfectionist who learned to live with imperfection, a man who chased immortality only to discover that legacy is built not by winning, but by what you leave behind in others. His sons carried his torch in coaching, his name adorned schools and scholarships, and his spirit lingered in the quiet hum of every locker room where discipline still mattered. When future generations study the NFL, they will see his fingerprints everywhere, from the structure of training camps to the way leadership is judged. He taught that success without ethics is hollow, that a scoreboard without honor means nothing. And he proved that even in a sport of violence, the truest strength lies in self-control. Don Shula's story is more than the tale of a man who won 347 games. It is the story of America's pursuit of excellence, of a time when character mattered as much as skill. He showed that greatness is not measured by moments of triumph, but by decades of consistency. In the final measure, Don Shula did not just coach football. He coached a generation in how to strive, how to fail, and how to rise again. That is why his name endures, etched not only in the record books, but in the quiet respect of those who still believe the game should be played with honor. When the last whistle fades and the helmets are hung for good, what remains of a man like Don Shula? Not just numbers, not even the trophies, but a reminder that greatness is built on choices no one sees. His story forces us to ask the same question he asked himself every morning. Did I give everything I had today? In a world that now celebrates flash over substance, his legacy calls us back to the fundamentals: discipline, honesty, preparation, respect. He proved that leadership is not about control but conviction. It is about standing firm when comfort whispers your name and saying, "Not yet." Maybe that is why Don Shula still matters. Because every person who has ever chased a dream knows the cost of perfection. The sleepless nights, the doubts, the quiet fear of not being enough. Shula carried all of that and still showed up, day after day, year after year. So when you think of him standing on the sideline with that stone face, stopwatch in hand, eyes fixed on the field, remember what it meant. It was not coldness. It was belief. The belief that work done right still matters, that integrity still wins, and that even in loss, there is honor in trying to be perfect. If this story moved you, keep his lessons alive. Share it, remember it, and apply it in your own pursuit of excellence. Don Shula may have left the field, but the game still carries his heartbeat. This was NFL Hidden Truths, where football's legends still whisper their stories, and where the truth behind the glory always comes to light.